Hello everyone, my name is Christina and I'm going to be your host for today, Nature Live Online. Now, if you've been watching Nature Live Online, thank you so much for being there. And if you just came across this show, let me tell you a little bit about Nature Live Online. Now, during these shows, we bring the Natural History Museum in London to your homes. We bring stories and collections. And to do that, we invite some of the museum scientists to be our guest and tell us those stories and share those collections with you. Now, we stream live, which is really exciting because it means that while I've got loads of questions for our guests, you can ask your questions as well. So you can comment on the chat if you're watching from social media, and we'll try to get through as many questions through as possible. Now, if you've been enjoying Nature Live or if you enjoy the show today, consider giving us a donation. It doesn't matter how big or how small, we always appreciate. We've been closed for a long time, we're now open, but we do appreciate any help that you can give to the museum. Now, today we are going to be celebrating Fascinations of Plants Day, which is a worldwide celebration of botany around the world. Now, and for this, we have a very special guest today that is going to tell us about extinction and how is it happening closer to us that we think. Now, let's say hello to botanist Fred Rumsey and give him a great welcome because it's always really exciting to have him with us. Hello, Fred. How are you doing?
Hi, Christina. Doing fine. Yeah, lovely to see you, Ian.
It's so great to have you with us, and I'm really looking forward to talking plants with you and celebrating these fascinations of Plants Day. Now, before we start talking about these plants that are becoming extinct, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at the Natural History Museum?
So I'm a curator at the museum, so I look after the pressed plant collections that we have from the British Isles, our fern collections, and also the historical collections. So some of the material that was collected as early as the 1600s, which formed the basis of the museum's collections.
Now, Fred, today we are going to be talking about plants that are becoming extinct in the UK. Now, people might not be aware of that, but there are plants that people might have seen in the past and won't be seeing them today. Why is it important to talk about these plants that are disappearing?
I think it's very important to be aware of the fact that so much of our wildlife is under threat and is declining, because each of those species which is lost has other species which rely on it. So once these things start to go, it causes a real problem for much of our biodiversity. So if you like the plants, they're there providing food for the animals, and they're a really essential part of the communities, the biodiversity of this country. So many are very beautiful but disappearing.
And Fred, we've got some lovely plants here now on the screen, and we actually would like to ask our audience a question. We would like you to comment on the chat window. If you can send us a comment if you've ever seen any of these plants before, and you can tell us where you've seen them. If you've seen them in your garden, in the wild, maybe in a walk in somewhere across the UK. Now, while people are chatting, Fred, can you tell us a little bit about these particular flowers? What are these flowers that we're seeing here, Fred?
Okay, so these are two very beautiful flowers. The blue one is a gentian. It's the spring gentian, which is a very rare plant in Britain. It grows in Teesdale, but also in the Burren in the west of Ireland. It's an Arctic alpine plant, which has definitely declined, even though it was always very rare. The other plant is a corncockle, and this is one of our sort of arable weeds, or was. It really has become extinct as a crop weed, although people are probably familiar with it because it is widely grown and sown in these sort of lovely sort of flower borders that people have now taken, particularly sort of on sort of roundabouts in towns and in brownfield sites. There's been a lot of sowing of these sorts of plants. And that's probably where people are familiar with seeing the corncockle.
And Fred, you've mentioned it, that people, one of them was a bit more strange to see, but people actually were commenting in the chat that some people were saying, shame I've never seen these flowers before, and now it seems by the comments that they know that it might be really difficult to see them. Some people were saying that they've seen them in local gardens, so there might be some hope there. So we're going to be talking about plants like the gentian and the concacle that we were seeing there, plants that we might have seen in the past, that we might spot somewhere, but sadly they are slowly declining. And these two are some of those flowers, aren't they, Fred?
Yes, that's right. There's a whole wide range of species which have been lost, are being lost, or on the edge of extinction in this country. We're very fortunate that there are very few species which we've actually entirely lost, but it feels like we're reaching something of a tipping point. There are so many which are just on the verge of completely disappearing, and there are very many different threats. It's not just one sort of thing which is causing this problem. So there are lots of different sort of influences on different habitats, and that affects a wide range of species.
Brilliant, Fred. And I think that also the story behind here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but even if we've seen some of these plants in local gardens or in parks, they're still declining. They're still slowly disappearing. So it's important to keeping an eye out for them. But let's talk a little bit about those reasons, those pressures that these plants and flowers are experimenting in UK, and the threats that are actually making these populations to decline. Now, some of the flowers that we're going to show, people might have seen them. I definitely have seen them, if not here in Spain, but they are suffering because of changes on agricultural practices. What does that mean, Fred? Let's have a look at those flowers and unpack a little bit. What does agricultural practices mean?
Okay, so many of the most threatened plants we have are the species which used to grow in our crops, and we for various very good reasons, we want our crops to produce as much as possible. You know, we've got lots more mouths to feed these days, and we put an awful lot of effort into cleaning out our fields. The seeds are cleaner when they're sown, and then we use pesticides and herbicides, and that means that many of these susceptible plants are wiped out. So that we have here the thorowax, which is effectively extinct as a crop weed. In the middle, the corn buttercup, which has had a greater than 85% decline over the last 50 years or so. It's virtually gone from almost all arable fields now. And on the grass here amongst the poppies is interrupted brome, which was only ever found in the British Isles mainly as a weed of sandfoin crops. And we just don't tend to grow sandfoin anymore. And there are various other physiological reasons why the modern agricultural practices mean that this plant can't survive. And it became extinct in this country and therefore in the world in 1972. And it was just very fortunate that it was being grown as part of someone's PhD study, that we had the seed to actually put back out into a few places.
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
So these plants are really, amongst some of the prettiest, but we just don't notice them anymore. The whole pattern of agriculture has changed. The intensity has changed as well, and we put in so much in the way of nutrients into these fields as well.
So it's whether we start using different agricultural methods or using different ones, and the different things that we use. But you introduced something quite interesting there, the nutrients that we're putting on the ground as well with these for agriculture. Now, this is a big word, but eutrophication is a problem as well for plants. And this is what we were talking about, putting nutrients on the ground that then go on different areas and actually affect plants not in a positive way. And also other plants get affected by that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Fred? Why putting nutrients on the ground can be a bad thing?
It's a really big problem for many species which are adapted to growing in low nutrient environments. So quite often small species, things which can't compete with bigger growing things, things like this annual gnaw, which again has had more than an 80% decline over the last century. These are plants, I say, which don't compete well, and when you start adding nutrients and those nutrients leach out of our fields and into our water courses, and all the pollutants that we produce in our more urbanized world as well, they all add to the nutrients which are in these systems. And that means that the plants that really cope well and really enjoy those very sort of rich conditions, like sort of nettles and thistles and things like that, big coarse growing things do really well. But so many little species get forced out and lost, and that's a real problem. We have several species which do very well, and lots more species which have just declined to the point of almost to extinction.
So it's a little bit of a balance, isn't it, Fred? Because you mentioned that nettles, for example, which are also a wild plant, also beneficial for pollinators. But the fact that they are too abundant might then reflect on other wild plants not being so abundant, and finding that balance of also our relationship with them, I imagine. Is that right, Fred?
It's true. Ideally, we want to keep as many species as possible, to be as diverse as possible, to maintain lots of different sorts of habitats, microhabitats. And what's happening is we've got sort of much more of a homogenization and fewer habitats which support fewer species, and that has a big knock-on effect.
Fred, we've seen a wonderful flower here, and I want to talk a little bit about it. But I just want to remind our audience that you can ask questions as well to Fred. So feel free to put them on the chat on social media if you're watching from any of our channels. And I'll try to get through as many questions as possible. I've got plenty of questions for you, Fred, though. Also, I wanted to thank Dylan Paul for their donation as well. They make a small donation to the museum, and remind everyone that if they can make a donation, we always appreciate it. But let's talk about this wonderful flower here. What is this, Fred? I've never seen it in the wild. Maybe because I don't pay enough attention.
No, you'd be very fortunate to see it in the wild these days. This is crested cow wheat. It's a member of sort of the snapdragon family, really, and it's actually parasitic on the roots of the grasses that are around it here, and also on some woody plants. And this is a plant which has been lost again through changes in management. It's largely changes in woodland management.
All right.
So we don't really manage woodlands much these days. In the past, the fuel, the wood was a really important thing. The timber taken out and used for so many different purposes, but we also used the leaves as forage for animals. There were more animals actually in those woods, stirring them up the ground. The light was getting in, and when in those bits of nature reserve you may have been to, where we still maintain those traditional coppicing and cutting back of the wood. When you do cut the woodland down for those periods, the sunlight comes in, all these lovely flowers come up, particularly the spring flowers, and we are sort of lacking those these days. Where we do have an understory of plants in many of our woodlands now, it's just sort of brambles and a sort of nasty thicket rather than being the lovely sort of density we had.
It's really interesting to see how our what we do and how we are treating nature affects nature in a different level. There is not just us picking plants or our cutting plants or our building on top of the plants. It's also what we do in the plants around all the plants as well that affect. And you're talking about coppicing and how we manage those woods, and that can change it, the ecosystems completely. Now, Fred, also the way we go on vacation, I suppose, on holidays as well, because our coasts are also suffering these pressures, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, coasts are under a lot of pressures, obviously, with rising sort of seawater, with storm events which sort of cause breakthroughs and damage. And in the past, we've tried to to keep the sea out. We just build higher and higher and stronger. And as a consequence of that, many of the plants which used to grow around the coast and the sort of softer habitats have disappeared. One example is this least lettuce, very sort of unpalatable relative of the salad plant. And this used to grow on these old sort of sea walls, soily sea walls and embankments around the sort of East Anglian coast and down as far as sort of Sussex. And it's just about disappeared because its habitats have gone, because we've just replaced them with sort of concrete and brickwork rather than the soil. But I think things are changing. We're realizing that we can't, we can't build ever higher. We have to let the sea break through in a managed way, and that really helps with getting some of these habitats back and these plants back.
Mm-hmm. I think I don't know about all the environments, but I'm quite familiar with coastal environment protections and how they protect the plants that are there. Because there are places where we go a lot, and I suppose that's happening as well in, especially now that we're looking into holidays and forests and the countryside as well, isn't it, Fred?
Yeah, I mean, but if we think of those sort of lovely Mediterranean beaches, the footfall, the number of people going onto those sort of sites, if you're a little fairly delicate plant which grows at the top of a beach, you're going to get trampled to pieces if the sea doesn't sort of wash over you. And they were adapted to being moved around by the sea, but they can't cope with hotels being built on them and people walking over them constantly. So it is an issue on the coast, definitely.
So, Fred, we've seen some beautiful flowers. We've seen even relatives of foods that we eat, like this lettuce, the lesser lettuce here. But plants that are threatened as well are also things like carnivorous plants, right? They are having some problems as well in the wetlands where they live. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, certainly in lowland England, we've drained such a large area. Partly to build houses. We don't want to be sort of sitting there in very wet places. For our agriculture as well, it's been essential to have this sort of drainage of some of these sort of boggy areas. And as a consequence, there are very few really nice sort of very soggy sites, boggy sites where plants like this greater sundew still manage to survive. And those sites get smaller and smaller, and more fragmented, so they can't sort of there's no gene flow between populations. And as the sites get smaller and surrounded by more things, there's always the chance that again the nutrients will run into those sites. So even though we have nature reserves and we have protection, it becomes very difficult to isolate those things from the wider environment and some of the bigger issues like eutrophication and like climate change, which is very difficult to combat on a local scale.
And now that we've seen the maps of the distributions on some of these plants, you can see how, you can see clearer spaces. And you were mentioning before the isolation of those plants and the problem that is they can't move around, they can flow, they become so adapted to one area that then the moment something changes on that area, they disappear, I imagine.
That's it. Once you start to lose populations, lose areas, just chance events can cause extinctions, and there's no chance for recolonization because the next nearest population is too far away for seeds to get there. We're not moving animals around in the way we used to, which was one way of moving propagules, moving sort of seeds and bits of plant about naturally. So as things become more and more fragmented, more and more pressured, we can just lose things inadvertently, and that's a real worry.
Absolutely. Now, Fred, we were getting some questions from our audience. There's still a little bit we need to talk about the threats that these plants are suffering, but we're getting excellent questions from our audience. And what it seems is that people are really worried about what can they do in the garden as people to help rewind what is happening here. So for example, on YouTube, somebody were asking that their boys, Ranulph and Anton, are growing a selection of wildflowers, and what would you recommend them to grow, for example? And Julia as well was asking, what can we do in our houses or gardens to help protect these species? So there are two very linked questions. Is there anything that we as individuals can do, or is it very difficult?
I think there's an awful lot we can do, and our gardens, obviously, it's a large area of the British Isles now, are down to gardens. So what we put in our gardens really does matter for the wildlife more broadly. I think we have to consider that there have been some problems for the wider countryside because of things which have been introduced to gardens, escaping from gardens, becoming invasive. And one way around that is to think to grow native plant species, because they'll be better for a lot of the pollinators and the things which would naturally feed on them. Obviously, doing that in a responsible way, where you source them, where you get them from, needs some thinking about. But you say that there are. It's not as if British plants aren't pretty or beautiful or interesting in other ways. There are thousands of species out there which are native to this country, which you can grow, and that can make a difference, I think.
You can see beautiful meadow banks or sideways where you can see beautiful, colorful flowers, blue, red, yellow, and they're still as beautiful as any rose that you can find in any garden. So absolutely, that's amazing. Fred, that actually links. There are also some plants that are also suffering that might not be that pretty to the eye. I find them all really pretty. Don't get me wrong. Show me anything, I'll be really excited with any plant. But maybe people overlook them, or they don't pay so attention with them. And climate change is one of the things that is actually affecting them quite badly, isn't it, Fred?
Yeah, I mean, climate change has some positives. Obviously, there are new arrivals, there are southern species. Our flora and fauna is a very dynamic thing. So new things come in naturally, but as a consequence, we also lose things as well. So while the Mediterranean plants in our flora are gaining, the Arctic alpine plants, the plants that like it really cold, particularly cold in winter, are disappearing. And one of them is this oyster plant, which is sort of like a big, juicy, succulent forget-me-not, which grows on beaches. This used to grow as far south as sort of North Wales, even sort of 50 or so years ago. Now you probably almost need to go to Orkney and the Shetlands to see this, because it just can't cope with the warm. But as you were saying, the many of the plants which are affected are these little tiny plants, the things which don't have the big showy flowers, things like the mosses and liverworts, because many of those are growing in these Arctic alpine situations. They're at their southernmost limit in the British Isles, and we just don't have the winters we used to have. So the plants which are growing in these late snow beds on the Scottish mountains, the snow isn't persisting anymore. Their habitat has just gone, and we will be losing many of these species. The problem is that so many of them are so small and inconspicuous that only a few specialists will even know that they were there in the first place and know that they've now gone.
And I would like to use this moment to encourage people to look around, to look for these species of plants as well. That might be not so eye-catching, but they're there and they're beautiful once you look at them closely. The liverworts, also some mosses are incredible, and the intricacy of them when you look at them closely, and it's wonderful to actually enjoy them. And it's really sad that some of them are slowly disappearing without actually us worrying about them. But Fred, our viewers seem to be quite concerned about it, and they, as I said before, they wanted to know more about it. Another thing that they were asking about is about how to give the plants nutrients. Is there something that you would recommend to them? Somebody was saying, for example, coffee grounds they've had, and some people were saying, or maybe avoid peating compost, because that will damage plants like the sundew. So what would you recommend them in that aspect?
Well, definitely, I think it's fairly widely accepted now that the way we've used peat is completely it's not sustainable, and there are very many good non-peat based composts that you can and should be using now, because those peat bogs are globally important, and there are so very few left. And many of those have been so very badly damaged. So yes, we need to be thinking and acting responsibly with what we grow, what we're growing it in, and how we're growing it. Those things do make a difference. And there are things we can do to again act in a sort of greener, more sustainable way. Yeah, use coffee grounds as they can be quite good to in some situations. You're using the compost or for deterring some sort of herbivores and things like that. Yeah, if you're a gardener, try to make the most of your compost bins. Sort of actually actively compost and do things and try to behave in a slightly more sort of responsible way, I think, and just think about things a little bit more.
That's brilliant. Now, Fred, we were talking a little bit about what we can do as individuals, which is always a massive effort as well. But what we've been talking about today, it looks a little bit bleak, and it's sad that some of these amazing plants are disappearing, but they're just some examples of many of the plants are slowly declining and disappearing in the UK, becoming extinct. What does the future look like, and do we have any other big efforts, governmental efforts, institutional efforts that are actually also trying to protect these plants and stop this happening?
I think it can look very bleak, and you sort of think back to how things were. It is very difficult because so many of the issues are such a large scale, sort of climate change and whole agricultural practices, things like that. They just really are something which we, as sort of private individuals, you feel, how on earth can I do anything about that? I think it has been really good over this last year to see people really valuing wildlife, valuing gardens, and little things that we all do all add up. There are millions of us. If we all do lots of little things, that makes a change. We can get involved with societies which care about these things, which have a voice, which push governments and others to try to act again more responsibly. And it's a sort of, it is a tipping point for the planet more generally, and for wildlife. We do need at this time to really be thinking about this and working on this, so that we can, I think, make these changes that we need to get better agriculture, to get better subsidies, which actually provide the right sort of thing for a wider variety of flora and fauna. It shouldn't be impossible, and I'm sure we can make that change.
I'm so glad that you finished in such a positive point. You said, I'm sure that we can make that change, and I'm sure that we as well. In the meantime, I think you've given us some tips as well to do a bit in our gardens and do what we can, and then just talk to our MPs, talk to our government, and support these initiatives. But sadly, Fred, we've reached the end of the show today. So lovely to reach it in such a positive note, and I'm sure I'm hoping that people will take that as well. But I'm going to say goodbye to you, Fred. But hopefully until the next time, because it's always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for talking about these wonderful flowers, and that hopefully we'll start seeing again. I'm going to say goodbye to you now, but see you soon, Fred.
Okay, bye to everyone.
Bye, Fred. Thank you so much as well for joining us all in this chat as well, and sending your questions. And of course, thank you as well for sending your donation. We also had a donation from Monique, and Monique, thank you so much for that. If you have enjoyed the show and have been enjoying Nature Live Online, do consider make a donation, small or big. We always appreciate. But in any case, it's always brilliant to have you there. So yeah, thank you so much for being there, and thank you so much for your questions. Now, Nature Live happens every Tuesday at 12:30, and we have so much more exciting content ready for you. Next week, my colleague Alison will be talking about an incredible new book. So if you like dinosaurs and if you like paleo art, the art of the dinosaurs, join us, because she's going to be talking about Locked in Time, which has been written by paleontologist Dr. Dean Lomax and illustrated by paleo artist Bob Nichols. It will be a really exciting show. Now, if you want to know more about Nature Live, you can keep an eye on our social media channels, and that way you'll be able to keep up to date with us. And you could also check our past shows in our YouTube channels. Now, also remember that this show have been part of Fascination of Plant the events in worldwide, and there are loads of other shows, events and activities happening to celebrate the plants of our world around the world. So please do check out the website. We'll put it on the chat, and you'll be able to see what other events, what other activities are happening. So if you like plants, check them out. But aside from that, once again, thanks for tuning in. Thank you so much for being there. It's time for me to say goodbye. See you next time. Bye.